Treasure by Marie McSwiggan, Chapter 5. Peter and his father had reached a level stretch. Their trail paralleled a railroad siding that ended abruptly in the woods. At one end of the track was a boxcar, and on both sides of it were men and sleds. Peter could only see dark outlines against the snow, for no light was showing, but when he got close he saw that a lantern was lit, its beams carefully shielded by the backs of the men. One of the backs belonged to Uncle Victor. "Hi, Lars," he greeted his brother cheerfully. "So you've brought Peter. Good." "He can help," his father said. "He can go with Olson. He's ready to leave. You can help him pull his sled, Peter." His father turned to him. Watch where Ole is taking you, Peter. That's the place you'll want to remember." "Yes, father." Peter gave a tug of the rope of the sled. It didn't move. "Gee, it's heavy." "Heavy? I should say it is." Ole took the rope. "It's 170,000 kroner. Your Uncle Victor would say $40,000. Peter didn't care what Uncle Victor would say. 170,000 kroner in that sack? He couldn't believe it. They followed the railroad siding in the direction he and his father had come. Then they took a trail that led downhill for a distance. That made the going easier, except where it was steep. There they had to hold the sled back to keep it from bumping their legs and knocking them forward down the slope. After a time they came to a dense part of the woods. "Father said we're going to a cave," Peter asked Ole. "What cave?" "Wait, you'll see." Peter was mindful of his father's words to watch where he went, and be able to return without help. Now he found that he was recognizing landmark after landmark. Here was the rock they called the Ship when they played. There was the tree that was rotted through. When he was small, Père Garçon told him that trolls lived in that tree, and to this day he thought of it as the Troll's Tree. So he felt very much at home. Here he was in the woods he had known since babyhood, but in all his life he had never heard of a cave there. That's why he was surprised when his father told him he would see one. "We must be going a long way off," he said. "I never heard of a cave anywhere near." Ole grinned. "I guess you didn't," he said. "It's one we made ourselves." "You made it?" "Yes, you'll see." They came to a high wall of snow, where they stopped. Ole led him past the wall and around its end. Now Peter could think of no part of the forest like this, where a wall stood as high as a man, and yet all of the things near it were familiar. The ship and the Troll's Tree. Then he guessed that the wall, like the cave, had been built by the men. When he drew the sled around it, he found himself blinking in the lights of lanterns and flashlights. He was in a cave indeed. In it were a dozen men, and there was room for many more. "You made it?" Peter was staggered. "Not all," Ole explained. "Behind those stacks is a wall of stone that slopes, so you could stand under it in a heavy rain and not get wet." "I know, Thor's Rock, but it used to be open on every side. We closed it in with blocks of ice." The men in the cave greeted Ole and Peter. Peter knew them all. There was Helga's father, and Nansen the sailmaker, and Dr. Acker and Mr. Anders, the schoolmaster, among them. They were busy as beavers. The ones in the back did not stop for more than a nod to the newcomers. 3 of the others rushed forward to remove the heavy brown sack from Ole's sled. Peter saw them rip it open and noted with surprise that it contained a number of smaller packages, each the size of a shape of a building brick. These were counted carefully and listed on a paper Mr. Anders carried. 72, 73, 74. Dr. Acker was counting aloud. Later the doctor reached 1,300. 1,300 of those bricks? Peter asked Ole. "Yes, and each of them contains 18.5 pounds of gold bullion, over 20,000 kroner. It's a regular Aladdin's cave you're in," Nansen the sailmaker spoke. "There aren't many boys who have been in a room with more than 24,000 pounds of gold." After a time, some of the men Peter had seen at the railroad siding began coming in. With each arrival, the same thing happened. The men in the cave would unload the sled, slit open the sack, and then began counting and stacking the smaller packages it contained. Over them all hovered Mr. Anders and his paper and pencil. It's coming near the end, he smiled happily. Yes, praise all, Ole said, wiping his forehead. Tonight'll see the last. Nansen looked around from the wall he was making of the brick-sized packages. Here comes the rest of it, someone said, as Uncle Victor and Peter's father came in together. Every last pound's been removed. Does it make it come out all right, Anders? Mr. Lundstrom asked. The schoolmaster made a swift calculation. He looked at the sheets in his hand and counted the sleds to be unloaded. 87, 88. What have you there, Doctor? He asked his helper. They quickly added the figures. Well, Mr. Lundstrom, he announced proudly, it's exactly right. It's all here. And that's it for Chapter 5.